Hello everyone, Stephen Miller recording, back with a new video. Today, I thought I would dive into some more tracks that were sent to me quite a long time ago actually now. This one is from a good buddy, Sean Overstreet. We've worked together in the past on a couple different songs, and usually when I work with him, he is writing these tracks for other people to like rap on or sing on, or at least that was the case with me working with him in this instance. So these are the full tracks of something that we have previously done before, and seeing this for the first time. And I really enjoyed working on this song, and it's really cool to see what all went into it, because I think Sean is a very creative producer. I really like all of the cool soundscapes he's able to make inside of his pieces here. So let's dive in real quick. If you notice here in Logic, I already have all the tracks labeled and color-coded. When I mix, I like to work really fast because I want to spend more time focusing on the impact emotionally than all the technical mumbo-jumbo. When I mix, I feel like it's really important to hold on to that first impression that you get from it. My philosophy with this one, since I know Sean puts a lot of thought and effort into every single one of these tracks, they're all stereo tracks and they're all panned with different effects the way he wants them. So I'm just trying to, if I were to mix this for him, I would just try to clean up what he has. I wouldn't try to go crazy changing a bunch of sounds or anything. And when I do have to change a sound, I'll explain why. And if this were something that he and I were working on together, I would want to be in communication with that. But I'm going to dive in and just do what I think sounds cool here. So I like to color code my tracks. I like to be able to look at a session and know exactly what all the tracks are without having to really read anything. So I always make this red, like burnt orange colored drums. All my bass tracks are purple. And then all these are guitar tracks, just various shades of blue and green. Cleaner sounding guitars, I use brighter colors, and the heavier sounding guitars, I use dark colors. And then I always make my vocals pink. Those are the things that I always do, is those three colors. And then everything else is just kind of random, whatever I'm feeling. Or I won't color it at all if it doesn't bother me too much when you look at it. At this point, I'm done setting up, and so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to zero out all the faders. Alright, and we're just going to take a listen.
The mind is a labyrinth, ladies and gentlemen, a puzzle. And while the paths in the brain are plainly visible, its ways deceptively apparent, its destinations are unknown, its secrets still secret. And, if we are honest, it is the lure of the labyrinth that draws us to our chosen field to unlock those secrets. Others have been here before us and have left us signs, but we, as explorers of the mind, must devote our lives and energies to going further, to tread unexplored corridors in the hope of finding ultimately the final solution.
Scam, battle like a ram, poetry I slam. This is my command, this is my demand. You cannot withstand, I don't give a damn. I gotta see, I gotta know. I want to be free. About how to go about, heal the inner cow. Last round of the bout, watch spout. This is what I tout. Got to scream and shout. Find a different route. Now I can see that I didn't want to know. Can we ever be free? We'll see how it goes.
All right, excellent. So this is what we're working with. So as you may have noticed, while the song was playing, I was going through and just kind of moving some faders. And that first initial fader move, I think, is the most important part of the whole thing, because that's kind of now your start point for the mix. So if you notice, I didn't start adding any plugins, I just did volume. Now, when I was checking out these tracks before I started mixing them, I noticed that Sean sort of put in the tracks all the panning information for me, so I'm going to try to leave that alone if I can. He has like weird stuff just coming out of the left side or weird stuff just coming out of the right side, and it's very unconventional, and I really like it, and I don't want to screw with it too much if I don't have to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a look at these drums. What I noticed about those drums is that the shells are so much louder than the cymbals. I only have a stereo track of the drums. Normally I would ask for the different pieces to separate them out, or maybe this is just a loop and this is what he has, and that's fine, but we're going to use what we have and we're going to make this work. So what I have done is I've duplicated these tracks already, and I have one labeled shells, the other labeled cymbals. So what I'm going to try and do is use a compressor or a limiter to squash the sound of the shells so only the cymbals can come through. I'm just going to use L1, and you can just bring these two faders down until the cymbals are the same volume as the shells. So if you look here, we have the cymbals kind of living around 24, and the kick and snare go all the way up to 0. Okay, so as you can hear with that, the cymbals do not change volume at all. It's just the kick and the snare duck down to be quieter. Okay, so what we can do now is we're going to raise the ceiling so the cymbals are loud. Alright, now I'm going to pull up an EQ, and I'm going to kind of manage some of this low end. When you use compressors and you're squashing all the frequencies together, sometimes you can get frequency buildups in certain spots. So I'm just going to carve out where I'm hearing some things happen. Now we have these two tracks here. It's just the same drum track duplicated to a separate track. This one's labeled cymbals, this one's labeled shells. And what you can do now, once you kill all of the shells, you can blend it back in with this double that I've labeled shells. So I'm going to turn it all the way down, and I'm going to start bringing it up to get the cymbals to sit in the mix where I would like them.
Devote our lives and energies to going further, to tread unexplored corridors in the hope of finding ultimately the final solution. We have to see, we have to know. We have to see, we have to know.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. Find the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan.
So now we have a full drum kit sound again. Alright, so moving on to the bass. You can hear that it's there, but you can't really tell if it's a bass guitar. So we're going to give this bass guitar some love. So this gain plugin here, I'm just making this track mono. It's a stereo track, and just to double check that there's no, like, because I know that some of the panning is baked in, so if I know I want this bass to be in the center, and so just in case it isn't for any reason, it is now. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a limiter. So I'm going to use this limiter, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to make every one of these attacks be around the same volume level.
Going further.
Alright, so once we have limited the bass, I'm just now going to listen to it with the drums and see how they react together. Alright, so what I'm trying to do with this EQ, with this really drastic bump, I'm noticing there's no high-end information in the bass at all. And I want it to sound like a more realistic bass. And so if you listen really closely, you can hear like all the finger noises, the sound of the bass attack, all that fun stuff. So I really want to hear that more. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do here. Now, I'm having a hard time with a plugin. I'm boosting, or an EQ. I'm just boosting the crap out of it and nothing's happening. So I'm going to try something else. We're going to try the Aphex Vintage Exciter. And what this will do is this will just add harmonics to the signal so we get more of an idea of that top end info. That's going to help us move along, and then we're going to do another similar type of thing. This is Waves Vitamin. This is a multi-band version of the Aphex. It does similar stuff. So what we're going to do now is, there's a preset on here called Brand New Bass, and it's supposed to simulate having new strings on your bass. There we go. This mid-range is what we were missing. Let me solo that band for you. That weird radio mid-range, all that is what you're going to hear if you listen to music on small speakers. So if you wonder why in rock songs like you can hear the bass even though there's no low end, it's because they're putting a lot of this sound in the bass tone. So without it, you can just tell all the clarity goes away. So now we'll listen to everything in context again.
That energy to going further, to tread unexplored corridors in the hope of finding ultimately the final solution.
Alright, so even though you're not hearing a whole lot of that extra stuff in the mix, even still, it does make a big difference in more exposed parts. So let me go over to where the vocals are.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand.
Alright, I'm going to mute these plugins as we go so you can hear what the difference is. It's going to be very subtle, but you're, what I'm really hoping to do here is help the bass guitar stand out as its own instrument while also tightening up the low end of the mix a little bit. So let's check this out.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. On the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see your scam, battle like a ram. Poetry I slam, this is my command, this is my demand. You cannot withstand.
Now another thing we can do to get those to come out more is we can limit slightly more aggressively. So let's try that.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. On the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see your scam, battle like a ram.
Yeah, so you can hear it. It's very subtle, but when those finger noises are there, it sounds real. But I like this, so we're gonna move on. So now we have all these guitars. The way he got the tone, I'm imagining, is also some sort of like practice amp or a probably a multi-effects pedal, because it has this very distinct flavor to the distortion. Let me tell you what I mean. This sound right here. It sounds like digital, harsh fizz. It's not a good or a bad thing, it's just what it is. But it helps to make an educated decision on maybe why some of the tracks turn out the way they did. So for these clean guitars, for instance, I really like the clarity and the punchiness, but it's almost a little too sharp and spiky sounding. Let me show you what I mean here. So if you look, these transients are really spiky, which isn't a bad thing, but if you listen to it, you can tell there's this really aggressive sound happening on the transient. It almost has that like piezo acoustic guitar sound happening, and I'm not a super big fan of that sound because those pops of the attack, the low end is really cloudy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an EQ, and we're going to find that low end pop sound when the guitar pick attacks. what I'm going to do now is apply this EQ to the other clean guitar tracks. So I hope you guys heard what that was doing. There was this low end popping sound that I think was conflicting with the bass and the kick. So now these guitars should sound like they are standing out on their own a bit more.
And while the paths of the brain are plainly visible, its ways deceptively apparent, its destinations are unknown, its secrets still secrets.
So I actually kind of miss the low end now that I hear it and I hear what it's doing to the mix. So I'm actually going to back this off just a little bit.
Ladies and gentlemen, a puzzle. And while the paths of the brain are plainly visible, its ways deceptively apparent, its destinations are unknown, its secrets.
There, I think that's a good compromise. I'm still taking care of the issue I'm hearing, but I'm not killing the tone or the character of the part. So let's keep moving along. Okay, so the next thing I want to touch on is the vocals. I kind of want to make them a little more clear and have them just really be the shining stars of this mix, because that's what vocals are. Vocals are the most important thing. So let's see, before I decide how I want to process it, let's decide how we're going to tell the story. This song builds from the beginning all the way to the climax where you have the distorted guitars entering. So the vocals have different sort of affects to them, A-F-F-E-C-T. You know, a different emotion to each section, right? So the beginning, you know, he's whispering, and then he gets a little bit louder, and then everyone is really loud for the distortion part, and then there's a fade out, right? So we want to be aware of those dynamic shifts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a limiter on here. And what this is going to do is it's going to smash down on everything over the threshold. And what that's going to do is it's going to make everything sound a lot more in your face.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. Find the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see your scam, battle like a ram. Poetry I slam, this is my command, this is my demand. You cannot withstand, I don't give a damn.
Okay, so this is the vocal in question, and notice how when I switch it on and off, you can hear the words start to jump out. I'm going to mute this other vocal so you don't get distracted by it.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. Find the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see your scam, battle like a ram. Poetry I slam.
I like how the consistency of the words is better, but now if you listen, you can kind of hear some like gurgly, grumbly low end from just the voice reacting to the microphone.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. Find the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we
That sound, this
began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see.
and that as well. So I'm just going to tame those just a little bit.
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. Find the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see your scam, battle like a ram. Poetry I slam, this is my command, this is my demand. You cannot withstand, I don't give a damn.
Alright, and so what this is doing here is I'm just lifting up the high end just slightly so I can get more of that sound of like the mouth noise, like the P's and the T's and the breathing and all that stuff, just so it can be a little more just so it could be a little bit more in your face and not sound so distant, because this is the lead vocal, right? So
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. Find the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan.
here's another thing that you'll notice with limiters. They're just not very forgiving. So if you want to get your dynamics still, you have to add them back somewhere else. So if you listen to this, or actually you can see it rather, over here, you can look at the attenuation meter.
Find the promised land, fuel the flame. Crucible, a brand I can see.
It never really goes past 6, but over here,
Bow, how to go about, heal the inner cow. Last round of the bow.
the vocal is in compression most of the time. So here's what I'm going to do for that. I'm going to make a new track just for this section here, so I can use different compression settings that are appropriate for the vocal.
How to go about, heal the inner cow. Last round of the bow, watch as I black out. On the streets a drought, still I got some clout. Heart is filled with doubt, sour like a kraut. Inner child pout, flavor like a stout. Hook you like a trout, tree of life a spout. This is what I tout, got to scream and shout. Find a different route. What you know about, how to go about, heal the inner cow. Last round of the bow, watch as I black out. On the streets a drought.
So if you look what I did here, whenever I play this section, it's still hitting the limiter the same amount as this section. So the tonal change that the limiter adds, the amount of that will be the same, but also then you can play around with the volume of each section, and the compressor isn't going to get super weird or react weird because you're driving it too hard. And also now you have more freedom to tell your story here, because when you over limit it, it's going to make it sound smaller. And so we don't want to do that. We want the vocals to grow as the song's growing.
So check out my flow. What you know about, how to go about, heal the round of the bow. Watch as I black out. On the streets a drought, still I got some clout. Heart is filled with doubt, sour like a kraut. Inner child.
So notice how when I moved it up here, it just sounded so smashed and weird. But now when it's down here, since I'm not over compressing it, it's going to have the same sort of dynamics in the performance as the first part does. It's going to sound a little more natural.
Got to scream and shout, find a different route. Now I can see that I didn't want to know. Can we ever be free?
Okay, here you can really hear all of that processing we did to the bass. I want to kind of tame that a little bit, because we also have this distortion track that we can use to get that snarl back later. So I'm going to cut this here. I'm going to duplicate the track. I'm going to drag this down, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and just mute. Well, I'm not going to mute. I'm going to open up Vitamin again, and I'm going to play with these three, probably actually these two sliders, to get the right amount of clank I want out of the bass guitar for this section. So we need to get this bass up and at 'em, because this is what's going to make it sound super awesome. So I'm going to take this limiter again, and I'm going to go find just where it's catching all the little peaks. Alright, so now I'm going to bring back my normal bass track, and I'm going to bring this out ceiling up until they blend in a way that I like. Alright, and then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to EQ it, so together they sound like a decent bass tone. So what I'm listening for is this honk. There's like a weird low mid sort of honk sound that I'm trying to get out, and this is what it sounds like. Alright, so these two together I think sound pretty good. Okay, so with this track, I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to make this mono. Because the stereo-ness, if that's a word, on it isn't really working for me. It doesn't sound like what it's supposed to be doing. Because we have this, a right track, and then we have this track where it seems to have both, and then only a left side. Yeah, there's only a left side on it. And so what it looks like he did was he had two guitars pan left and right, but since it's the same guitar, it really doesn't work like that. So I'm just gonna make it mono, and I'm gonna pan it myself. And then the same with this one, just in case there's something that drifts. I'm going to put this on here, I'm going to make it mono, and I'm going to pan this one all the way to the right. So now we should have a larger stereo image for this section, so let's try that. Excellent. So I like the way that it's behaving a lot better, and because I made it mono, we lost a little bit of gain, so I'm going to just do this on these plugins so I can move my faders back where I want them. Alright, now this guitar here, it's kind of clouding the mix a little bit because it just takes up so much space. It's very stereo, yet there's tons of stuff in the center, so we're going to try to fix that a little bit. We're gonna just make it appear on the sides. I don't want it in the center at all. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to this plugin here, side widener. This just makes mono sources stereo, or if it is a stereo source, makes it wider. There's different kinds of modes. They just sound different. I'll show you, I guess. I usually like 2 or 3, so I'm going to make it a little bit wider. I'm going to bring that tone down. The tone kind of makes it sound darker. And just kind of messes with the center frequency of the stereo effect, if that makes sense. So I like to bring it back just ever so slightly. And so now let's see what that does to the rest of the mix. Now the next thing I want to work on is Sean has this vocal part here, and this is kind of, he's moving from like a backing sort of role to, this is the lead vocal here, so I'm going to put this on a different track. Okay, and I'm just going to label this. Okay, and this one I'm going to put the same processing I used for the first vocal track. And I'm just going to adjust the limiter to, actually I should use this one. Okay, so these are actually 2 different takes, and they're kind of reacting to the limiter in different ways. So I don't want that to affect each other. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna load up a dual mono version of this limiter, and I like these. I like the way this sounds, but I don't like the way it's behaving, if that makes sense. So what the dual mono version of this plugin does is it looks at the left and the right as independent sources, and it will compress them independently of each other as opposed to being linked. And so for instance, whatever happens on the left side, that limiter is going to affect both channels the same way. And so what this should do is, because the left and right are being processed differently, they're going to sound different in both speakers, and it's going to make the stereo effect that much more pronounced. So let's see what this does. So this is, let me have both of these up so you can see it. So this here, the S means stereo, the M means mono. So I'm going to bypass the mono one, and we're going to listen to the stereo version of the plugin on these vocals. Okay, and here's the mono version, dual mono version. So with this, there's less symmetry in the sound. You'll notice that the stereo version sounds fuller and the vocal sounds more in your face, but we don't necessarily want that. I want more of a stereo widening effect. And so we're gonna go with this one. So with this one, you can hear that the vocals no longer are the same volume coming out of both of the speakers. They're kind of dipping and popping up depending on what's actually happening in that specific side of the channel. So we're going to leave that alone now. I like that. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how all this is sounding. I like the balance I'm getting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking about some master bus processing. So typically people will tell you not to do a bunch of master bus processing, but I think that is a pretty big part of your sound. I mean, you're shaping your overall mix into something that you feel happy and confident with. And sometimes it's tedious to go in, and change all the EQs at the track level to get this global picture you're looking for. But I just find it so much easier to just put something on the master bus and call it a day. You want to work as efficiently as possible, and if making a small move on your master bus saves you hours of time, then you should do that, especially if you can't really tell the difference in how it sounds. So there's 3 plugins I like to use for my master bus. The first would be a compressor, the second would be an EQ, and then I would have a limiter. And then depending on how the track behaves, the last thing I'll do is put a clipper. And if someone else is mastering my stuff, I would remove the limiter and the clipper, and depending on what I'm having them do, I might even remove the bus compressor as well and let them figure that out for themselves. But just to make this sound as good as I can right now, this is what I would do. I will go in here and load up a compressor. I've tried a lot of different compressors for this, but I usually gravitate towards 2 these days, the Slate FG Gray and the Slate FG Red. I've been leaning towards the red more lately. I'm just kind of feeling it. What I like to do is I like to go 3-to-1, set my attack and release at noon, just to start out right, and then I'm going to put this filter at around 55 hertz. And what this does is anything below 55 hertz, the compressor will not see it, and it's going to prevent the compressor from pumping too hard. And so the reason why you'd want to filter what the compressor is seeing is a lot of low-end information can trick the compressor into over-compressing signals, and so you want to just make sure that the compressor is reacting to the parts of the song that you want it to react to. So I want it to react to the snap of the snare, the sibilance and the vocals, and not so much any of the bass info. Okay, so we're going to start with this, and we're going to see what is happening. And what I'm looking for is I'm trying to make the snare sound snappier and just kind of bring everything up and sound like a cohesive mix. Just try to contain it all.
If we are honest, it is the lure of the labyrinth. We have to see. We have to know. We have to see. We have to
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. On the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see your scam, battle like a ram. Poetry I slam, this is my command. This is my demand, you cannot withstand. I don't give a damn. I gotta see. I gotta know. I want to be free. So check out. Flavor like a stout, hook you like a trout. Tree of life a sprout. This is what I tout. Got to scream and shout. Find a different route. Now I can see that I.
Alright, so I like this. I like to compress maybe 1 to 2 dB whenever the kick and snare hit, and it just kind of, you feel the mix pump slightly for that second, and it makes the impact feel harder even though there's a little less volume, and so it kind of gives you a more of a cohesion between the tracks. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. All the tracks are moving and pumping together, and it's very musical. And so you also notice that I had the compressor working really hard in the beginning. When the compressor's working that hard, it's that much more obvious to the timing of the compressor, and that helps me set my attack and release time. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go for an EQ. I really enjoy using a Pultec style EQ on my master. So the real Pultecs have tubes in them, and a lot of people will even just use the tubes as a filter. So I really like the sound of what happens when you run it through the tubes. Let me show you exactly what that does. I'm going to bypass this and I'm going to engage it. So even though there's no EQ boost or cuts, you're going to hear a difference in the tone when I turn the EQ on.
We have to see. We have to know.
Okay, so even just turning the plugin on, it makes the song sound more forward, more in your face. When I'm looking at the full picture, I kind of want to clean up the low end a bit, just so it sounds a little bit tighter, and I want to bring out some more clarity in the top end so it doesn't sound so dark. And that way when you listen to other songs in a playlist, this one won't sound super murky and in the background.
We have to see. We have to
Consciousness expand like a rubber band, gauntlet in the sand. Find the promised land, fuel the flame I can. Back where we began, formulate a plan. Marathon I ran, crucible a brand. I can see your scam, battle like a ram. Poetry I slam, this is my command, this is my demand. You cannot withstand, I don't give a damn. I gotta see, I gotta know. I want to be free. So check out my flow. What you know about?
What I did was I just cut out a little bit of the low mid-range. All the tracks seem to be building up in that area. I just kind of wanted to tame that. And then when I was picking what to do with the high end, what I'm listening for is the clarity in the vocals and just the air in the mix. If there's no air, it just kind of feels too distant and it doesn't feel as intimate. The song has a lot of like dynamics in it, and I just want to kind of bring that out. And even though there's a lot of like mumbling and whispering and stuff, I still want everything to be very well heard and very close to the listener's ear. So depending on which frequency you grab with the EQ, it's going to affect different parts of the mix. So as I was bringing it down, I saw it was adding some harshness to the guitars and the cymbals. But if I kept it up here, it was really only affecting like the clarity of the voice and a little bit of the hi-hat. So I was still getting what I wanted to without making such a drastic EQ. So we're boosting up to 3 on this. Now I don't know if this relates to dB or what, but it just it's labeled 0 through 10, so I picked 3. That's where I like it. So let me bypass the whole thing, and then I'll engage it for you. You can hear what that does.
This is my command, this is my demand. You cannot withstand, I don't give a damn. I gotta see, I gotta know.
Okay. It just kind of lifts it out of the mud a little bit. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll use a limiter. There's a couple limiters that I like. Lately I've been going for the Pro L. Really like the Pro L. I like the Pro L because they have a lot of good presets. I know a lot of people will say that presets are like stupid or they're cheating, but they're actually really good start points. And so if you're trying to work quickly and not try to lose the vibe of the song. You want to be able to pull up a sound right away and just be able to go like either yes or no, or just make a quick decision. You don't want to spend a ton of time dialing in knobs. It's just it kind of kills the vibe, right? So I'm just gonna go on a whim here. I'm gonna say synth pop extra impact. Let's see what that does. Because I'm thinking this might help us maintain the punch in the drums. So when you're working with limiters, limiters can trick you because as you start to apply more limiting, the song gets louder, and sometimes we think louder is better. So try to match your output with your input gain. So it's going to be different for every plugin and every computer, but for me, if I hold down the option button and bring this up, notice how the output fader, or the output knob rather, moves with it. So as I apply more limiting, it's going to keep the volume the same. So I can actually just judge critically what the limiter is doing to the song. Okay.
I want to be free. So check out my flow. What you know about how to go about, heal the inner gal. Last round of the bout, watch as I black out. On the streets of drought, still I got some clout. Heart is filled with doubt, sour like a kraut. Inner child pout, flavor like a stout. Hook you like a trout, tree of life a spout. This is what I tout, got to scream and shout. Find a different route. Now I can see that I didn't want to know. Can we ever be free? We'll see how it goes. Three of Swords.
So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to squash the kick and the snare as much as I can without changing the tone of it. And what this will do is it'll help bring them into focus with the rest of the mix. Now, because I'm having such a hard time doing this, it probably just means that they're too loud to begin with. So I'm going to lower the sound of the shells just slightly. What I'm hearing now is these distorted guitars are sort of masking a lot of what's going on with the drums, just because they're so fizzy. So what we're going to try is we're going to add a cabinet sim or an impulse response to these guitars to kind of make them sound like they were recorded with a speaker with a mic in front of them, rather than this sterile kind of DI thing that's happening. So let's see what that can do for us. So, all right, so here I have this reverb plugin, and what's cool about this one is you can load in your own impulse responses. So I'm just going to load an impulse response. So I'm going to use this impulse from Joey Sturgis Conquer All Volume 4. It's this. It's an orange 212, and we're going to do a just a 57 through an API preamp. Let's just use that. That'll be good. I'm expecting this to be kind of beefy and kind of darken the sound a lot. So I'm just going to apply this to all of these, or just these two left and right distortion guitars. So that's with the caps, or that's with the impulse response, and here's without. Personally, I think that's a little too dark, so let's find a different sounding one. Let's try this Marshall 4x12, and we'll do another 57 with the API. Okay, excellent. So now they sound like real guitars with a real mic on the cabinet. This is cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just EQ these a little bit. I like to use this SSL channel strip to EQ guitars. I just love the way the EQ sounds on guitars. You can really go crazy with them and it won't make them sound super terrible. Okay, so that's sounding a lot less harsh, and you can actually hear there's toms in there now in that section, so that's great. Everything's a lot clearer. The next thing that I'm noticing is during these outro vocals, there's just a little too much delay, a little too much reverb, kind of muddying up the vocal. Can't really understand what it's saying. So this is another job for side widener. When everything is everywhere, I try to just either make it mono or I make it stereo with nothing in the center. And what that usually does is you're decreasing the number of reflections that are just ping-ponging around the mix. So let's listen to what this will do for us. Once Sidewinder was enabled, you could hear all of the diction in the vocal. Obviously, you can still hear all the reverb and delay too, but now you can actually understand what's being said. Okay, so now we're going to revisit the limiter and see if we can just get this to work the way I need it to. And right now I'm just trying to look to even things out and just have a nice in-your-face kind of sound that doesn't take away too much from the vibe. right, that's excellent. I'm going to go back to this EQ. I'm noticing there's some low end buildup that I'm not too keen on. So we're just going to slightly take that away. Now let's listen. Now that we got the limiter working, we can take advantage of the volume boost. And I'm just going to go ahead and put that back at 0. Now the mix is going to be a lot louder. And the client, whoever hears it, isn't going to be like, well, why is it turned down so low? Blah, 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 all that stuff. Loudness wars still exists in 2020. Don't let anyone tell you different. The people who complain about the loudness war are just losing. Having your product be loud and competitive with everyone else is still important. We're just going to look at the metering and see if this clips the track. Alright, and it does. So there's a couple things you can do. You can either turn down the output here, or what I like to do so I don't lose the benefit of the output being so hot is I'm just going to add a clipper plugin. And what this will do is the clipper plugin will clip the audio in a way that hopefully sounds better than just the master bus algorithm getting slammed. So we're going to listen to that now. Okay, so as you can see, all this is doing is making sure that it doesn't actually clip, and it does kind of make it sound a little more aggressive too. Okay, so bottom corner of the screen. All right, so anyway, I think this is it. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to listen from the beginning to the end. And, well, actually before we do that, let me just show you what all the master bus processing is doing. And I'm going to go ahead and just level match this again so you can really hear it. Okay? I'm just going to start in the middle of the song, and I'm going to just turn everything on and off, and you can hear what all the master processing is doing. Okay, so we're compressing, EQing, limiting, and then clipping. Just in very subtle stages all the way through, but it makes a big difference. All right, so now here we are at the end. I'm just gonna play the song from the beginning to the end. And that'll conclude the video. So thank you, Sean, very much for providing these tracks. This was a lot of fun, and hopefully all of you learned something. And thanks for watching. This is 3 of Swords.
The mind is a labyrinth, ladies and gentlemen, a puzzle. And while the paths of the brain are plainly visible, its ways deceptively apparent, its destinations are unknown, its secrets still secrets. And, if we are honest, it is the lure of the labyrinth that draws us to our chosen field to unlock those secrets. Others have been here before us and have left us signs, but we, as explorers of the mind, must devote our lives and energies to going further, to tread unexplored corridors in the hope of finding ultimately the final solution. We have to see, we have to know. We have to see.
All right, thanks again, Sean. Thanks again, Morbidicus. And thanks to all of you. I'll see you next time.